Yes, I've started the recording.
Okay, so welcome all of you for another evening of learning, teaching and learning. So learning physics with conceptual and problem-based approach, which is organized by the National Academy of Sciences, India, Delhi chapter. It is a 10-week course which started on 27th of July 2020, and we are now in the third week of the same. And today we are having lectures on wave and optics by Dr. Pushpa Bindal, and also lectures on nuclear physics. So that's the schedule for today. And now please may I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Pushpa Bindal. So Dr. Pushpa Bindal is an associate professor of physics in the Department of Physics of Kalindi College, University of Delhi, and she has been working here since 1992. She is a master's and a master's of technology and PhD from IIT Delhi. She secured first rank in her MTech and second rank in MSc course, and she is recipient of the award for college lecturer given by the government of Delhi in 2018. She has served as TIC of Department of Physics in several years, 93-95, 4-6, and 16-18 at our college. She has 30 publications in reputed journals and conference proceedings. She has organized a number of national seminars and workshops sponsored by UGC, DST, and NASI, etc. She has guided a number of undergraduate and postgraduate research projects. She is a life member of scientific bodies like IEEE, Indian Association for Physics Teachers, and Shakti Vibha, etc. She has been active involved in the curriculum revision and examination review in Delhi University. And as I said yesterday, she is one of the very experienced teachers in a field of interest, that is waves and optics. And I think it is just appropriate that we all revise our concepts of waves and optics with her, today being the part 2. So welcome, Dr. Bindal. I'm so glad that you have agreed to give a lecture. We should be always glad to every teacher who is ready to impart his or her knowledge to us. It's only by gratitude that knowledge flows from the teacher to the student. So I consider also a student, myself as a student, when I listen to any lecture given by any other teacher. So welcome, ma'am. Please give your talk today.
Thank you, Dr. Pinto, for the kind introduction. First of all, I would like to thank Nasi Delhi chapter, particularly Professor Ghatak, for letting us organize this event, and also thankful to you for providing this opportunity to me. So thank you so much. Now I would like to share my screen. Screen is open. Is my screen visible to you?
Yes, ma'am. Waves and optics.
Yeah.
By Dr. Pushpa Bindal.
Yeah. Okay, so I thank the participants also for joining us. So we would like to continue our sessions on waves and optics. This is session 2. So in the first session, we talked about waves in general, particularly superposition of waves of different types, collinear waves, two waves, N waves, perpendicular waves, Lesage's figures, etc. I wanted to actually complete that portion, so probably I was a little fast yesterday, and I apologize for that. I didn't really realize that I was very fast. So I request the host to sound me if I go fast today also, but I will try not to. Now, before I start today's discussion, I read a question later on, not at that time. It somehow didn't become apparent to me. It somehow didn't, I couldn't see that earlier. But somebody had asked a question yesterday that why waves, they follow Fermat's principle, why they take the least time path, etc. So my answer to that question would be that, these are fundamental principles. It is the nature which governs these things. Now, for example, I could say this is a similar question to if an apple, falls from a tree, why does it go down only? Why doesn't it go up? Right? It is the gravity which decides that. So this is a fundamental, nature. This is the nature, this is the force of the nature, rules of the nature. If you talk about Snell's laws, then Snell's laws can't be proved. They were observed, compiled, and given by Snell. Okay. So generally, there are so many things. If you talk about the force of attraction between two bodies, that force F is equal to G m1 m2 by r square. So that again is, given by nature. It is, basically this is observed and followed by bodies. And what is the role of the scientists? Scientists try to observe it, try to interpret it, and then try to, put it to the use of for mankind, so that mankind can utilize it. Okay. So if you have, if Fermat's law basically tells you that light takes the, basically that path which takes least time. And this is very much, observed by scientists. And Fermat was the one. It is a very, very fundamental law of optics. So he was the one who kind of put it together, who kind of explained it. Okay. Law of extremum, right? So there is no explanation for that. It is there in the nature, right? Now, for example, this is another thing, that if you launch white light into a dispersive medium, then different wavelengths, they travel with different media, different velocities, because they see a different refractive index. What is the basic, concept behind that? The entire, all the wavelengths, they must take equal time to traverse that medium and come out at the same time. Have you ever seen that red light is coming first and then green light is coming after a few seconds and violet light is coming some 10 seconds later? No, it is governed by nature. Nature decides that. We are nobody to decide that. Okay. So it is a nature which takes care of these things. So I start today's, lecture with the concept of coherence. Coherence is a very, very important, topic, a very important concept in the field of optics. We keep on, listening to things that source is more coherent. Laser is more coherent than sodium light. Sodium light is more coherent than ordinary white light source like a bulb. What is this coherence? And, how it can be put to any use, or where does it appear in the real experiments of physics? Okay. So coherence basically, as is written here, coherence is that property of the waves which decides that the interference pattern will be a stationary interference pattern. Okay. Stationary means it doesn't change with time instantaneously, right? So definition of coherence is that two wave sources are said to be coherent if they maintain a constant phase difference between them at all times. And the desirable, features are, this is of course a must, they must have same frequency, they must have same waveform, right? So, we will understand basically where this coherence crops up in real physics experiments. But the basic definition is this only: two waves are said to be coherent if they can maintain a constant phase difference. Okay. Now there are two types of coherence: temporal coherence and spatial coherence. The word temporal coherence, actually temporal word means in time. So temporal coherence means coherence in time, right? So the proper definition would be that this describes the phase correlation between waves observed at two different moments, at two different t's, t and t plus delta t. If you observe the waves at t and t plus delta t at same position, and if there is a phase correlation between those two, you say these waves are temporally coherent. Okay. Now, similarly, spatial coherence means that if you have phase correlation or between waves at two different points in space, okay, transfers to the direction of propagation. This is also called longitudinal coherence, and this is also called lateral coherence, by the way. Okay, so this basically tells us how uniform the phase of the wavefront is. I'll explain it a little bit more in the next, slide. But basically it means is that if you have phase correlation at two different points, okay, for at same instant of time, then you say the waves are spatially coherent, right? So mathematically you will say x naught plus x t and x naught. At x naught you observe, x naught plus x you observe, and of course at same instant of time. If the phase correlation is there, if the phase difference is constant, you will say the waves are spatially coherent. Okay. Now, to understand the concept of coherence, Young's experiment is the best experiment, although you are going to see this slide once again. But this is the, basic experiment which explains the concept of coherence beautifully. How? You see, Basically, Young's experiment is what? Young was the first scientist who thought of this ingenious technique, method, that, you know, from one parent source, derive two coherent sources. If this is one pinhole, point source, then make two pinholes here symmetrically situated with respect to this one. Okay. Then, you know, the waves which are coming from a point source, they are intercepted at these two. Okay. Because they are lying, these two are equidistant from this. So they will lie on one wavefront like this. So they are intercepting the same wavefront. Actually, the wavefront is getting divided. Okay. And then each one of them, you know, acts as a point source, and the waves travel in different directions from both of them. Okay. So they meet at different points on the screen with different phases because they travel different distance to reach here. But this primarily, you know, satisfy the conditions of, you know, interference, that they are derived from the same parent source. Because, you know, these two are phase correlated, so they are going to maintain constant phase difference at different points on the screen, and you are going to observe a stationary interference pattern on the screen. Now, where is this coherence? Why did I, you know, keep this slide here? How do I explain the concept of coherence with the help of this diagram? You see, understand it like this. On screen, you are going to see alternately bright and dark fringes, right? Okay. Wherever the condition for maxima is satisfied, you're going to see bright intensity. Wherever the condition for minimum intensity is satisfied, you're going to see a minima here, right? And like this. Alternately, you will see, you know, bright and dark fringes like this. My question is, how many fringes will you get on either side of the center? Will it be 10 fringes? Will it be 100 fringes? Will it be 1,000 fringes? What decides how many fringes are you likely to see on both sides of the center? Central point, which is equidistant from S1 and S2. This answer is hidden in the concept of coherence. Okay. You see, as you go away from the center, either direction. Okay. So the path difference between the waves keeps on increasing. Okay. It keeps on increasing, and you're using some source here, right? For example, supposing you're using sodium light. Now, sodium light has a finite coherence property. There is a property which is defined as coherence length that I'm going to, you know, again describe, but I wanted to make the concept of temporal coherence and spatial coherence clear first. Okay. Now, the coherence length of the sodium source is something about 3 centimeters. Okay, you can calculate it very easily, right? 3 centimeters is a theoretical limit. Now, the coherence here means that when this path difference starts approaching 3 centimeter, actually much less than 3 centimeter, this will start happening. Okay, when this path difference starts approaching 3 centimeter, which is the coherence, you can say limit, coherence length of the source that you're using, your fringes will first become faded, you know, the contrast will start going down, and then they will disappear. So that is what will decide that for sodium light, I am likely to see maybe, I don't know, maybe 50 fringes. Maybe after 50 fringes, the path difference will increase so much that I will stop seeing the fringes. So because, you know, at any point, supposing I look at this point is receiving light from this source as well as this source. Okay. It is receiving light from here. It is receiving light from here. So the waves which are reaching here at the same instant of time, if the path difference between them is much less than the coherence length of the source, the coherence property of the source, the temporal coherence part of the source, you will see a fringe here, but when it starts kind of approaching that limit, you know, you will stop seeing those fringes. They will become bad first, they will become dim first, and then they will disappear. It will not happen like this, that for 50 fringes, everything is very beautiful, and suddenly there is no 51st fringe. It will never happen like that. They will become blurred first, and then they will disappear. So this is the practical example of seeing coherence in an interference experiment. Now the next concept which we were discussed was spatial coherence. Now spatial word, as I said, means in space. In space. That is why you talk about phase correlation at two different points in space. Now, what does that mean? See, when we make a pinhole here, we assume it is a point source. है ना? We always talk about ideal conditions, right? But you're making a pinhole. You must be making a pinhole with something, a needle, something like that, right? So the question is, how small that hole should be so that I can call it a point source. Can I make a, hole with a pencil? Can I make a hole with the tip of a very sharp pencil? Can I make, what is the size of the, pinhole that is tolerable, that is going to act as a point source? This is what defines this is decided by the spatial coherence of the source that you're using here. How? Ideally, if this is a point source, if it is a point source, then it is giving out waves like this. If it is a point source, then this is a perfect wavefront, okay? One single wavefront corresponding to one single point source here. If this is a perfect wavefront, then any 2 points on the wavefront will always be in phase. Perfect phase correlation. That is what a wavefront is. Locus of points of constant phase. That is the definition of a wavefront. So if this is a point source, any 2 points, whether here or here, here or here, on a wavefront will always be phase correlated. Phase correlation will always be there. But if this is not a perfect point source, it is a pinhole after all, which you made with something, right? So if this is a slightly larger hole, then each point within this hole will act as a point sourse, okay? And then you will not have just one single wavefront corresponding to one single point source here. You might have point source, one wavefront corresponding to one point source here, another wavefront like this, okay? So if I am looking at this position and this position, what I see will be kind of superposition of these, so what will happen is they may or may not be phase correlated, right? Because that will depend on the dimensions of this source. So spatial coherence basically decides what is the dimension of this source so that I can call it a point source, okay? And that is very much a coherence property of the source that you're using. If you're using a laser, then this spatial coherence will be much, much larger. You can tolerate a larger, dimension of the source. But if you're using I don't know, maybe, generally it is actually sufficient. You might be surprised to hear that. If you can make a pinhole with on a, aluminum foil, you just prick it once with something like a diamond point, and that will actually be a good enough pinhole, point source, right? But this can't be said for sure. You have to measure it. This is again a coherence property of the source, okay? And this is precisely what is meant by spatial coherence of the source, right? So this is how it really affects our real experiments, okay? Now here, this is what I explained also, that in double slit experiment, another thing is this, you can also check that if you increase the distance between the two slits, obviously what will happen is that the path difference between the waves will increase very fast if this distance is much larger, okay? So coherence properties, coherence of the source will be, it will, because the path difference will increase very fast, so you will not be observe a very large number of fringes. Fringes will disappear fast, okay? So this is what is meant by coherence properties of the source. Now here, this is just a pictorial representation. If the path difference is 0 or very, very small, then you will see beautiful fringes. When this becomes quite large, I mean substantial, you can see dim fringes. And when this becomes very large, when you have exceeded the coherence property, they will cease to exist. You will not be able to see them, okay? Now, this is, kind of a representation of a coherent wave. You know that if you talk about a monochromatic source, plane wave, pure sinusoidal wave, then this remains sinusoidal for all times to come, okay? Once generated, it can go undistorted in form or amplitude or anything, okay? So this kind of a wave will be temporally coherent forever, okay? because all points, whether I look at a point here or I look at a point here, they will be phase correlated, right? But this is a real source doesn't produce waves like this. A real source produces wave trains. Then you have arbitrary phase shift, then again a wave train, then arbitrary phase shift, then again a wave train. Okay, the duration of that wave train, which is emitted by a real source, that will again depend on which source you're talking about. What are the coherence properties of that source? So the duration time of that wave train is called coherence time, and the length of that wave train, C into tau C. The coherence time is usually denoted by tau C. C into tau C defines the coherence length of the source. That is how you kind of work out the properties, coherence properties of any source. This is what I was saying, that if you have a point source, then point source, what should be the dimensions of the point source so that it can be treated as a point source. The waves coming out of that, they are spatially coherent for the interference experiment, right? Okay, right. Now we understand the concept of coherence, and let us now come to the next very, very important phenomena of optics, and that is interference, right? Now interference, what is interference? Okay, basically you can understand it like this, that if you in a medium, you just have one light wave produced by one source. So that light wave once produced will propagate indefinitely, something like this only. Something like this only. Supposing this is one source, okay, you switch it on. I mean, you have a bulb here or you have a sodium light here. Once you switch it on, supposing this is the only one, it is going to produce waves like this. Okay, it is going to produce waves like this. So the energy, light energy in the medium due to this is going to be uniform, right? But if you have more than one, supposing you have now another source, okay, so this is also sending out waves. So what will happen is these two wave trains, they are going to overlap. Somewhere, the superposition is going to be in phase superposition, and this is going to result in a wave of larger amplitude. And somewhere these waves are going to superpose out of phase and the energy will disappear from that place. Okay, so we can actually define interference as the redistribution of light energy. We can think of interference as the redistribution of light energy when you have more than one source. Okay, so one more thing you must understand, it is only the modification in the distribution of light energy. You cannot add any energy to the system, you cannot take away any energy from the system. Whatever has disappeared from the positions of minima, that is the energy which has appeared at the positions of maxima. Total energy is conserved. Okay, it doesn't go anywhere from the system. So if you are seeing a dark fringe, it doesn't mean that the energy from that has disappeared from the system. No, this is what has appeared as the more energy, larger energy at the positions of maxima. Okay, so this redistribution of light energy due to superposition of two coherent waves is called interference of light, right? Okay, now let us define coherent sources. Two sources are said to be coherent if they have exactly same frequency and zero or constant phase difference. Now, this is the reason this constant phase difference condition is extremely difficult to satisfy for light sources particularly. Okay, so it is possible to lock the phase of the light sources if and only if you derive them from the same parent source. Otherwise, the emission of light from the light sources itself kind of determines that the phase is going to randomly change, because each light wave is generated by de-excitation of atoms from higher energy states, which are metastable states, to ground state. In the process, they emit the extra energy in the form of visible radiation. Okay, and because they can continuously emit only for the time of the order of tau c, so you can never have phase correlation between two waves which are independent, which are coming from two independent sources, because there is no way, no method by which you can lock the phase of these waves. The phase can be locked only if you derive them from the same parent source. Otherwise, it is just not possible. Even for lasers, it will be extremely difficult. Okay, even for lasers which have such high coherence properties, if you do not derive them from the same original laser, it will randomly shift. You can see an interference pattern, but that interference pattern will also shift, here and there, because this tau c is always there. It may be large, but it is finite. Okay, so now there are two ways in which you can obtain interference, or rather, I would say that basically all the interference experiments that you study, they are just different methods of obtaining two coherent sources from same parent source. Okay, you can give them different names, you can make different arrangements, you can have different devices, but basically you are obtaining two coherent sources from same parent source. Okay, each has its own merits and demerits, right? Okay, now there are two, these are the main conditions that the phase difference, the most important condition is that they must maintain a constant phase difference, and they must be, they having same frequency, and therefore it is a must to derive them from same parent source. Now there are two methods by which you can divide one parent source into two coherent sources. The one is called division of wavefront or wavefront splitting. The other is called division of amplitude or amplitude splitting. What is meant by that? Okay, now both of these methods, they involve obtaining two coherent beams from one parent coherent beam, right? Now first method, as I said, is wavelength division of wavefront. So what is done here? You intercept the same wavefront at two places. You divide the primary wavefront coming from the original parent source, okay, into two sources by putting two pinholes symmetrically with respect to the primary source. You are intercepting the same wavefront at two places. You are dividing the original wavefront into two wavefronts. Each will then act as a source itself, and you are going to get beautiful interference fringes. Okay, now what are the typical examples which make use of this method? Young's experiment, Fresnel's double mirror, Fresnel's biprism, Lloyd's mirror, right? Now the other technique is division of wavefront. This is the division of amplitude. Division of amplitude means you divide the amplitude, or actually the intensity of the incident light, the primary light, the light coming from the primary source. How do you divide the intensity of the light coming from the primary source? We generally use what are called beam splitters. Beam splitter means those devices, that device which divides one primary beam into two beams by partial reflection and partial transmission. Actually, this is obtained, you can have a glass plate which is absolutely transparent. You can have a mirror which is not at all, which is perfectly reflecting. There is a stage in between which is 50% reflecting, 50% transmitting. You can polish to that extent. That is what will form a beam splitter, right? So what do? You basically, divide the wavefront of the primary wave into two, okay? And usually we use beam splitters. In particular experiments, you might use something else also. Now, what are the typical examples which make use of this? Newton's rings, Michelson's interferometer, all wedge-shaped type of experiments. And also there is one more, Fabry-Perot interferometer. Okay. So all these experiments make use of division of amplitude technique. Okay. You can see here, this is the incident light. Okay. You have a beam splitter here. Okay. Partly it is going in this direction, partly it is going in this direction. Then you do something, they come back and they superpose. Okay. And that is what leads to interference, because you are superposing coherent waves. Now, let us start the first interference experiment, that is Young's experiment. This is also taught at the school level. If you understand everything in this experiment, you understand more or less interference. Okay, so I have already explained it to you. One primary source, two coherent sources, point sources derived from it. Each becomes a source of waves in itself, gives rise to waves like this. waves are going like this from both of them. They meet at different points on the screen, and because they have traveled different distances to reach here, they are going to meet here in different phases, right? So wherever they meet in phase, then you are going to see a maxima. Wherever they meet out of phase, you are going to see a minima. Typically, this point is equidistant from S1 and S2, so no path difference. You generally will see a central fringe here, okay, bright fringe here. If you're using a sodium light, then you're going to see a yellow fringe here, okay. Then you go away in this direction or in this direction. Now, supposing I consider this point, then this point corresponds to not zero path difference between these waves, but some path difference, okay. Path difference has increased from zero, something, है ना? So what happens if the path difference is something, then you might not see a maxima here. Actually, if you go in this direction or in this direction, when this path difference becomes lambda by 2, okay, you will get a minimum. Go further, lambda, a maximum. 3 lambda by 2, a minimum. 2 lambda, a maximum. And of course, this is symmetric. Okay, this is symmetric. So you are going to see a beautiful set of interference fringes on the screen, which are straight line fringes, which are equidistant from each other, and which have an extremely good contrast. Okay, now these are the typical conditions. If the path difference is m lambda, integral multiple of wavelength, you see a bright fringe. Whenever this is odd multiple of half wavelengths, you're going to see a dark fringe. Fine. So this is the typical appearance of your interference pattern. There are always two things associated with any interference or diffraction pattern. One is, how do the fringes look like? They look like this, bright, dark fringes, okay? And this is the interference, this is the intensity distribution in that, okay? As you can see, this is the central fringe. At the center of the central fringe, you see the maximum intensity. As you go away from this, the intensity starts falling like this, okay? So it starts falling like this. When you reach the center of the adjoining dark fringe, you have a minimum or zero intensity, okay? Then again, you go further, the intensity will start increasing. When you reach the center of the next bright fringe, you will see a peak of the intensity. It is like this. So this is what kind of defines the interference pattern in Young's double slit experiment. Actually, any two slit experiment, any double slit experiment, which is analogous to Young's experiment. So you can say the two beam interference pattern, typically you will have this kind of an interference pattern, and you will have an intensity distribution which will exist like this, right? Now, these are the mathematical expression that we can easily derive. The intensity distribution which we just showed is I1 plus I2 plus 2 under root I1 I2 cos delta. This delta corresponds to the phase difference, which is 2 pi by lambda into the path difference, and the path difference is, you can calculate it, okay? So if you, this is the expression for delta, it is written actually here, xd by d, okay? The 2 pi by lambda into xd by d. xd by d is the path difference. You multiply this by 2 pi by lambda, that gives you the phase difference, right? So if you don't have equal intensities of the two interfering beams, this is the expression. As this delta varies, you will see maxima, minima, maxima, minima, okay? If you have, those beams which have equal intensity, then the expression is like this. Here the minimum intensity is not zero, finite. Here the minimum intensity will be zero, okay? Now, if you have incoherent sources, what do you mean by incoherent sources? Which cannot maintain a constant phase difference between the waves emitted by them, like two light bulbs in your room, they are incoherent sources, okay? So if you light one bulb, you have some intensity. Light one more bulb in the room, you have more intensity. What is the total intensity in the room? I1 plus I2. There is no modification like this. There are no interference fringes like this or like this. It is I1 plus I2 plus I3 plus I4. Light 10 bulbs, you will have 10 such terms contributing, okay? You can define visibility of fringes. Visibility basically means, how clear the fringes are, how different the intensity of a dark fringe is from the intensity of a bright fringe. How different is Imin from Imax? Obviously, if Imin is 0, then this is the best. If Imin is 0, then visibility is 1, perfect. Okay. But if Imin is not 0, finite, so this will, you'll have to this makes a compromise on the visibility of the fringes. Okay. But you can make this Imin substantially small by keeping the intensities of the two interfering beams pretty close to each other, right? If the intensities of the two beams, even if they are not identical, they should be comparable. Otherwise, you will not get a good looking interference pattern. The visibility will really suffer. Okay. Now, if the two intensities which are being emitted by the two coherent sources are in a certain ratio, okay, then you can derive this simply from the previous formula. Then visibility expression is this. Okay. So if they are in an intensity ratio alpha, then visibility is 2 under root alpha by 1 plus alpha. All these are easily derivable, right? Okay. So interference, Young's experiment was the first ingenious experiment. Young was the first scientist who thought of this ingenious technique, lock the phase between the two waves by deriving them from the same parent source. After that, of course, people designed various experiments based on this concept only. Okay. So for example, the next experiment in the field of interference is Fresnel's biprism. As the name suggests, it was designed by Fresnel. It is a biprism experiment. Bi means two. So it consists of two prisms. Okay. Actually, two prisms means something like this, but actually they are made from same piece of glass. It is something like this, that two prisms are joined base to base. Although they are not really, you don't make two separate prisms and then join them base to base. You make them from the same piece of optical glass because you don't want to suffer scattering losses. Okay. So there are the dimensions, the angles of this biprism are typical. This is 179 degrees. You can have a feeling 179 degrees is hardly different from 180 degrees, straight line. Okay. So actually you have to touch the prism to see this tape, to feel this tapering. It is not very visible if you perform this experiment. The other two angles are 30 minutes each. Okay. There is a reason why you keep this so large and this so small. The reason I'll explain in a second. But basically what happens is that, these two prisms, that this is the primary source, the actual rays go through these two prisms, they get refracted, and actually they appear to come from two virtual sources. Okay. So you obtain two virtual coherent sources by one primary source. So that is the main thing in this Fresnel's biprism experiment. Why do you keep such peculiar angles, 179 and 30 and 30? This will be explained in the further slide. I have a, this is the real experiment. This is the primary source. You have the biprism here. Okay. And you mount these on an optical bench. And then you have a micrometer eyepiece here, which serves as a screen. So these fringes coming, actually the rays are coming from here, but they appear to come from the two sources, virtual sources S1 and S2. So you say you have obtained two coherent sources by refraction here. Okay. So wherever these beams actually, superpose coming from S1 and S2, you see interference. This experiment is not different from Young's experiment in any other way. Apart from that this actually is, free from edges. You don't have slits here. You don't have holes here. So you get two coherent sources independent of apertures, right? Okay. And otherwise it is the same thing. Two coherent sources and one screen at a distance. Waves come, meet. Okay. At different points, you're going to see maximas and minimas, right? Fine. Now, this is the formula. This formula is valid for all two beam interference experiments. Fringe width is lambda d by d. Choose your source. Choose the distance of the screen from the source. Choose the distance between the two coherent sources, and your beta becomes fixed. It depends only in these three parameters. Change any one of them, beta will correspondingly change. Okay. Now there is just one thing in this experiment, and that is that you can't find out the distance between the two virtual sources directly. Why? Because they're virtual, you can't touch them, right? So you use a method called displacement method. I will not go into details of the displacement method because that will again, kind of eat up time. But basically you need to keep a convex lens of suitable wavelength, suitable, focal length in between. And for two conjugate positions of the lens, you find out the distance between the two virtual sources. And if you, when you find there is a formula, the formula is this is the thing, that for one particular positions image, there are called two conjugate positions, because for one position whatever is the object distance and the image distance, for the next position they will reverse. For the second position, whatever was the object distance for the first position, that will become the image distance, and the image distance for the first position will become the object distance. Okay, तो आप उसको substitute करिए, you get this formula. D is under root d1 by d2. Okay, these are the virtual distances between the two images of virtual sources S1 and S2 that can be measured with the help of micrometer eyepiece through displacement method. Okay, and you can this you can do physically. You can actually, using the displacement method, you can measure D1, you can measure D2, and you can calculate the D, the distance between the two virtual sources. Now, here is that answer hidden. Why did we choose such peculiar angles for the biprism? 179 degrees and 330 minutes and 30 minutes. This is simple optics, that the deviation of the ray when it passes through a prism. This is the deviation formula. Okay, and this is the formula for theta, the divergence of the beam. This is the real formula that we're interested in. This is what decides or kind of explains why do you need to choose such peculiar angles. Okay, why can't you make a 60 degree kind of prism? The reason is this. You see, for interference fringes, it is important to keep the distance between the virtual sources or any two coherent sources small. It is important, it is a must. Otherwise, you have to compromise on the coherence properties of the source, right? If you're using an ordinary source like sodium light, then you must ensure that this small d is small. The distance between the two sources is small. Now, how do you make this small? Right? The formula which you obtain is this. Through this, the formula for biprism is this, small d. What is A? A is the distance of the biprism from the actual source. Mu is the refractive index, and alpha is that refracting angle, 30 minutes. Okay. Now see, mu, you can hardly play with mu. You're using glass. So even if you use a very, very good quality glass, it will be 1.5 something plus minus. A is typically because the length of the, optical bench is typically something like 100 centimeter or 150 centimeters. So typically this A is kept somewhere around 30 centimeters, right? This is 30, this is something. You want to keep this D small. It has to be fraction of a millimeter. For an interference experiment, even for Young's experiment, the actual distance between the two sources S1 and S2 is actually around 0.2 millimeters. Please pay attention to the number, 0.2 millimeter, fraction of a millimeter. So you have to somehow make an arrangement so that this small d is small. Since you can't change this much, you can't change this much, you have to keep this small. That is the only way out. Okay. So if you keep this small, then this d will, basically be able to satisfy the conditions of interference. So that is the reason you keep it as small as possible. And obviously half of a degree, hardly anything, right? So that is the reason why you keep these angles small and you keep one angle very large, because you need to keep this small d small, right? Now, if you use white light source, you are going to see a central white fringe and then few colored fringes. This is true for all interference experiments. Okay. You can use any two beam interference experiment. You can use, either this thing, Young's experiment or Fresnel's biprism or Lloyd's mirror. This application is possible in all two beam interference experiments. Okay. What is the basic concept here? If you want to find out the thickness or the refractive index of an unknown sample, you should know one of the two. You should either know thickness or you should know refractive index. You can determine only one parameter. One of the two parameters needs to be known. Okay. For example, supposing we say we know the refractive index and we want to find out the thickness. So what is the method? This is an application of all these interferometers. You can introduce that sample in path of one of the beams. What will that do? Earlier, when there was no sample here, the path of this beam was entirely in air. So if the thickness of this sample is T, earlier this T was in air. Okay, it was traveling a T length of the air column. Correct. And going and meeting at the point P. But when you replace, when you put the sample here, then light beam, instead of seeing T, the geometrical thickness, it will see an optical path, mu T, mu into T, the refractive index multiplied by the geometrical thickness of the sample. When you have a medium having refractive index other than the air, then the light beam doesn't see the geometrical thickness, it sees an optical thickness. It sees an optical path. What is that optical path? Mu multiplied by T. Okay. So
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
I think Dr. Bindal's sound and video both are stuck, isn't it?
I think I should call her. I will call.
Yeah, probably she's not noticed that it is stuck and it is not getting transmitted. Attendees, please just have a patience. Yeah, so there was some network glitch. Attendees, please have a little bit of patience. She will join back again, I'm sure. Vishwajit, now you have raised your hand. What is it? Vishwajit Pal, why have you raised hand? You should note down where this raising of the hand button is there. Some people are just raising hands without any reason.
Ma'am Pushpa,
Yeah.
ma'am, so there was an electricity problem at her home, so she's coming in a minute.
It's okay. Yeah, there is some electricity problem. Even I have it in my area.
Yeah, because it's raining quite now these days, so might be.
So Vishwajit Pal, why have you raised hand?
Ma'am, he raised hand from the very beginning only. Even when the
So
talk was not.
probably you should see where is the button to raise hand, and then you should see that you don't just click it unnecessarily, because it is very disturbing. Somebody notes it looks like there is some problem, and then suddenly you realize there is no problem. It kind of distracts the person completely. So in today's lecture, we have been trying to give you further a flavor of waves and optics. And as I said, even if you know the subject very well, quickly revising everything within 1 hour is much more beneficial than hunting through various books. The books to be followed, as told by her, are Wave and Optics by Ghatak, 6th edition. And then you have Brijalal Subramaniam at a still lower level. There the figures are very colorful and nice, so you can use that. And I'll tell you more. Just a sec. Yeah. So for optics, in order to study optics, you should open up Brijalal Subramaniam to see nice, beautiful photographs and a small explanation. For in-depth understanding, you should open up Optics by Ghatak, and you should open up the book of Jenkins and White. If you really want to enjoy optics, then you have to study Jenkins and White. So these 3 books you have to do. Apart from that, because optics is a part of a graduation syllabus and is normally expected you are expected to know this for all entrance examinations and all examinations related to post graduation, such as JAM, JEST, entrance examinations of masters and so on. Therefore, for those, it is necessary that you practice the numericals from several books. Now there is this book by Tata McGraw-Hill, which is called 3000 Problems in Physics, where you have, as the name suggests, it's about 3000 problems in physics, right? So you have numerical problems of the graduation level on the entire syllabus of graduation. So you should do that. Then there is one book by Applied Physics that is also having. Yes, ma'am. Are you back?
Yeah. Sorry, मेरी light चली गई, वो थोड़ा सा time लग गया start करने में.
It's not a problem because there is this problem everywhere in Delhi, I suppose this days. Yeah, please, ma'am, share the slides. I was just sharing with them that they should start practicing numericals. If you have completed waves and optics earlier in your graduation course, then you should start practicing these numerical problems which are at the back of these books, 3 books. And if additional problems you want, then 3000 Problems in Physics, Applied Physics by Beiser, University Physics by University Physics is in itself a very comprehensive book which has n number of problems for every subject of graduation. Yeah, ma'am is back. Okay, ma'am, please continue.
I'll continue. Sorry guys, sorry for the break. So we'll start again. We'll start this thing again. What were we trying to discuss? That how to find out the thickness or refractive index of this sample. So if this is a sample having a refractive index mu, then the light beam sees mu t and a change in the length of the path, hence a change in the path difference. If there is a change in the path difference, the fringes will shift. The fringes will shift. If you can find out how many fringes have, shifted across the crosswire, you can use a simple formula and find out the thickness of the sample. This is the derivation part of this. You take away the t, add mu t, put it together, it looks like this. Do the mathematics that when S2P minus S1P is ST by D, substitute this formula.
Dr. Pushpa Vidyal.
Okay.
Ma'am.
And you get a formula for the thickness of the sample.
Ma'am.
You get, yes. Hello.
Ma'am,
yeah.
Please do.
What is this noise? Hanji, bolo. Yes.
Ma'am,
am I not audible? The internet connection is.
Ma'am, please switch off your video. Use a Wi-Fi and switch on only your audio so that it will use lesser bandwidth, and then the voice will be clear. The voice is breaking.
Voice is breaking. Okay,
yes.
Okay.
So you can shut off your video, and then it will be better.
Actually, yeah. Okay.
You can shut off your video.
Shut off video. Okay. I think I just switched the network connection. It was because of the light. If it is still a problem, I'll switch it off. Can you hear me?
Yes. Earlier the voice was breaking. Yes, ma'am. Continue.
Because of that, I had to shift the network because of the light. Now, this is the formula which you obtain for thickness of the sample. This is the shift of the fringes. Small d, the distance between the two sources, capital D, the distance of the screen from the sources, mu is the refractive index of the sample. So in terms of this, because this is the main part, you have to measure this, you can find out T. If you know T, you can find out mu, right? Instead of this and this, sometimes you also use lambda and beta. You know the formula for the fringe width. So either formula you can use, and you can find out either the thickness or the refractive index of the sample, right? Now, the next experiment that we talk about is Lloyd's single mirror. This is another experiment in which, what is done is you obtain two coherent sources by phenomena of reflection, not refraction. You have a, good quality optical mirror here, fine quality optical plane mirror here. You have light falling at grazing incidence. So this light goes to the screen.
And
Yeah.
can you please repeat the last slide the students are requesting?
Last slide. Oh, this,
Previous page
sorry,
is what they are saying.
Sorry, just a minute. This one?
Students, please write down on the chat box. Is this the one? Image. Some image they are saying.
Image.
Next.
Next. I think they might be. Are they talking about this?
Is this one? Image of biprism. Yeah, this one.
Biprism. This is Lloyd's mirror.
Now, no, yes, students, come on, don't confuse. Write down the name, previous method. Previous method of what? Biprism or Lloyd's mirror?
Okay, I understood. What they are saying is I should show the diagram of the biprism again. Let me show. Is this one? Yeah, फिर biprism.
Thickness in path. Thickness in path is what they write.
Okay, this one.
Yeah, okay, maybe. Yeah, they say yes. They say yes. Please, this one.
What is it that they want to ask? Are they asking anything?
No, they're saying just repeat it once.
Oh, okay. See, for any two beam interference experiment, irrespective of how you obtain these from the primary ones, then I am assuming these are two coherent sources which are small d distance apart. The screen is capital D apart. You are seeing interference fringes here. Generally, you will see a bright fringe here, then bright, dark like this. If you want to use this experiment for finding out thickness of an unknown sample, it could be a plastic film, some new plastic that you have made, okay? So supposing you want to find out the thickness of this, then what do? You place this in path of one of the beams, either this or this. If you place this in path of this beam, then the light doesn't see T thickness. It will see mu into T. This is called optical path length, corresponding to any sample which has a refractive index mu and a geometrical thickness T. It will travel mu T, not T, because it is light passing through the sample. Okay. So there is a change in the length of this path. Earlier it was just S1P. Now it is S1P plus something, right? Because this has increased, mu is more than 1. So now it is S1P plus something. If that is so, then the path difference S2P minus S1P is bound to change. If it is bound to change, then earlier, hypothetically, supposing I assume that I was earlier seeing a bright fringe here, I might not be able to see a bright fringe anymore, because the condition for S2P minus S1P corresponding to this bright fringe earlier is no longer satisfied. This path difference has changed. And that is what helps us in finding out or determining the thickness of this sample. So in the next one, this is the mathematical part, that from the path S1P length, you have taken away the geometrical thickness and added a mu T instead of that. Okay, they are now seeing mu T instead of T. So T goes away, mu T is added. So effectively you put it together, it is this. S2P remains S2P, we never did anything to that. Okay, so S2P minus S1P, right? S2P minus S1P, it becomes, this mu minus 1 into T. This is the changed path length. Now this expression we earlier it is derived for Young's experiment. I think everybody who has studied Young's experiment remembers this expression by heart. X small d by capital D. This is what this expression turns out to be. So what has happened, that this is equal to this now, right? So you equate this and it gives you the formula for small t. Small t is x d capital D mu minus 1. What is this small x? This is the change in path difference, or rather this is the distance by which, your fringes shift. Okay. Generally, it is measured in terms of shift of central fringe. Okay. How much it shifts. So you measure this experimentally. Small d is supposed to be known to you. Capital D is supposed to be known to you. Mu is supposed to be known to you. So if you know mu, you can calculate t. If you know t, you can calculate mu. These are the two parameters of the sample, but you need to know one of them. You can't determine both of them at the same time using this experiment, right? Now, for the sake of calculations, in some calculations, in some numericals, they don't give you capital D and small d, they give you beta and lambda. So you can replace this capital D by small d by, beta by lambda. Through the expression beta is lambda d by d. Okay, so these two formula are identical. Okay, so you can use either one of them to determine the thickness of the sample, unknown sample. Fine. So now can I go to the next experiment? The next experiment is Lloyd's single mirror experiment. Lloyd single mirror experiment. This was designed by Dr. Lloyd, H. Lloyd, in 1834. It is a very, very simple experiment. Okay, so let me explain that with the help of diagram. This is a good quality mirror. Typically, this is 30 centimeters long and few inches wide, and you blacken it at the bottom so that you don't have any internal reflections, right? And you take a monochromatic source. Typically, this is sodium light only. You make the light fall at grazing incidence. Why grazing incidence? Because you want this to be small. Same reason. This has to be small. You have to devise ways by which you can make it small. So to make it small, you make the light fall at grazing incidence. So the light goes to the mirror, gets reflected from different points. So on the screen, you are getting reflected light as well as direct light. So reflected light, as you can see, it appears to come from a virtual source sitting here. So in this experiment, your two coherent sources are, one is the original source S1 and the other is its virtual image obtained by reflection. Reflection, not refraction, okay? So wherever in this area, the direct beam and the reflected beams, they superpose, you will see beautiful interference fringes here. Same interference fringes, just like Young's experiment. Fringe width, lambda d by d. Okay, now this experiment is actually, kind of historic in itself. It kind of established many facts which people observed, then people try to interpret, etc. One of the things you should notice about this experiment. Number one, the point O, which is equidistant from S1 and S2, actually no reflected light reaches here. So this point is not visible. When you perform this experiment, you will not be able to see any central fringe. You will be able to see fringes only in this part of the,
Hello, is it same problem again?
Yes, ma'am. I think there is a network problem at Pushpa ma'am's side.
No, actually, there's a problem in Delhi today. This is the first time I'm having light going and coming with every few minutes. So, it's okay. So meanwhile, as she joins back, I will continue. You have to call her. Yeah, she's disconnected, so she'll come back. So as I told you that there is a book by there is a book called University Physics. It covers, and there is one book by one book named as College Physics. So College Physics and University Physics, and there are 2-3 authors which one should always have. Anybody who has to do anything with physics should have certain books like Giancoli, Tipler. Although they are elementary in nature, still one should have these books. So there is Complete Physics by Tipler. Resnick and Halliday you all know very well for your class 12. However, it has many concepts which are the very base of physics. I have found that students who have very good basics in their class 11 and 12 find it much easier to understand physics or any complicated level of physics. So Resnick and Halliday, Giancoli, Survey, S-E-R-W-A-Y, Survey, is one author who has written more than 2 books, and they're extremely useful for the students. And one book is called University, the other one is called College Physics. Nowadays, many PDFs are available free, and hence it is not difficult for you to consult these books. And the way to consult University Physics by H.D. Young, yeah, that's also there. So you should have these list of books with you, and apart from these, you must always have SHORM series. So SHORM series are there for almost every subject of physics, whether it is modern physics, whether it is quantum physics, electrical circuits, and so on. There are so many of them. And because they do not carry any theory more than 1 page, they just focus on the formulae. But the beautiful part of SHORM series is that you are able to learn one concept from one numerical. So if you do 50 numericals from a particular book of SHORM series, you have revised almost 50 types of concepts of that particular subject. So with these things, one can move ahead. And if you actually look at any of the entrance examinations for making careers in physics, or examinations for testing your knowledge also, it is all in all dependent upon how carefully you have read your basics and how carefully you have prepared your own notes. Taking notes from somebody might be good, but after a certain level, you must have your own gist, your own summary, and your own list of formulae, which lead to different concepts. This is extremely important. And if you do that sequentially, consequentially, methodically, so subject by subject, you have to do it and keep it in a proper way. That means accessible way. You see, you might have the whole of internet at your disposal, but it should be accessible to you in the sequence that you can understand. So just saying that everything is available on internet is not the answer. Your brain does not record or cannot record everything that is there on the internet. It can record things which you can give it to the brain as a food for memory. So random accessible memory and read-only memory of brain are two different things. I generally use these terms because your generation people understand more of computer language than any other language. So read-only memory is that you're reading your information from here and there. And random accessible memory of your brain should be that randomly you are able to access the memory locations within your brain, which acts like a computer, to take back or to get back all the formulae of different subjects altogether. And this is an art which is actually a scientifically developed art. So you can have this art only if you know how to do your physics studies in a scientific way. And the scientific way is nothing else but the methodical way. So develop not only read-only memory of your brain, but also random accessible memory of your brain. Yeah, ma'am, are you back?
Sorry, फिर से वो चली गई, फिर से वापस आ गई actually. तो net.
It's okay. Yeah, I'm also having these glitches. I mean, today one can be ready that I might also.
I know, पता नहीं क्या हो रहा है. Oh, okay, sorry guys. So we continue again. As I was saying that here you will never be able to see the central fringe. Why? Because it never receives any reflected light. Okay. For interference, you must have superposition of both coherent waves. So you can't see it, and you can only see the interference in one portion of the screen, right? But if you want to see it, then what happens is, what you can do is you can bring this screen here, and you will see that there is another very, very important optical phenomena that you're going to observe. Although this point is equidistant from S1 and S2, it will not be a bright fringe. You will see it will be a dark fringe. This point O will come to rest at the center of a dark fringe, not a bright fringe. So this experiment was the first experiment which established experimentally that whenever light suffers reflection at an optically denser medium, glass here, it undergoes a phase change of pi. This was an experimental demonstration of this fact for the first time, right? So that it is because of that reason that although O is geometrically equidistant from S1 and S2, it is a dark fringe and not a bright fringe. because the reflected light carries an extra pi with it. Because of this extra, extra pi due to reflection at an optically denser medium. So the point O, the central fringe is not a bright fringe in this experiment, it is a dark fringe. Okay, that is the second important thing which this experiment established. The third thing is that in this experiment, it is possible to obtain achromatic fringes. What is achromatic? Chroma means color. Achromatic means free of color. Okay, so it is possible in this experiment to obtain colorless fringes even after using a white light source. Generally, if you use a white light source, you get one central white fringe and then few colored fringes, and then everything becomes merged. Okay, but in this experiment, you can make an arrangement and you can, basically have a white light, pass it through something like a grating. You will have a spectrum. Adjust the inclination of the spectrum. If you have, red to violet, obviously you will have the corresponding reflected image. You have to adjust the angle and the distance in such a manner that lambda by d is same for entire spectrum, and you can do it very easily. Okay, once that happens, if lambda by d is constant for all wavelengths, obviously capital D is same for all wavelengths. So you are going to see white and dark, achromatic fringes, not one central white fringe and then few colored fringes and then everything uniform illumination. So this is a typical experiment which can produce achromatic fringes. So in these ways, this experiment is, you can say, slightly special. You can compare the two experiments, biprism and Lloyd's mirror. Here you have complete set of fringes on either side of central white fringe. In this case, you only see few fringes on one side. Central fringe is bright, dark. Central fringe is visible, not visible. Okay. And of course, one more point is that here you obtain coherent sources by refraction. Here you obtain by reflection. Okay. So now we explain the concept of this phase change of pi by optical reflection at an optically denser medium. This is called optical reversibility. This was explained by Stokes. So this is also called Stokes treatment. The reversibility principle says that if there is no absorption of light, a light that is reflected or refracted will retrace its original path if its direction is reversed. Okay. Now you can actually use this concept and explain this extra phase of pi by reflection at an optically denser medium. How? Supposing a ray of light A, ray of light having amplitude A is incident on this air glass medium. This is denser, this is lighter. So partly reflected, partly transmitted. Okay. Now, if the amplitude reflection coefficient is AR, then this will have an amplitude A into R. This will have an amplitude A into T. If you reverse the directions, then according to the principle of conservation of energy, you should get back this. You should, according to this reversibility theorem, you should get back this A. Okay. But what happens is, you have to define again how this will be partly reflected, partly transmitted. When you reverse this, partly reflected, partly transmitted. Here, whatever you get should be summed up to give you 0 because you never had anything to begin with, and whatever you get in this direction should be equal to A. So do that and you get two conditions. What are the conditions? One is that R square plus TT prime is 1. What is this? This is nothing but energy conservation. Energy is either reflected or transmitted. And what is this? R prime is equal to minus R. Okay. If you have reflection from this medium, not like this, but this medium, then you will have a minus sign here. Same magnitude, but a minus. Minus 1 is equal to e to the power I pi, because cos pi is minus 1. E to the power I pi is cos pi plus I sin pi. Sin pi is 0, cos pi is minus 1. So this actually, kind of accounts for that extra pi when you suffer reflection at an optically denser medium, right? So whenever light wave is reflected from an optically denser medium, it will always carry an extra pi with it. This is the same concept that because of that extra pi, if a wave goes as a crest, it will come back as a trough because you have a pi. Okay. Now we come to basically, interference in thin films. Dr. Punita, do you want me to stop? Okay, I'll continue. If she says I'll stop. Now, the next is that we would like to consider, interference in thin films. Okay. Now you can have two types of interference in thin films. One is plane parallel thin film. Plane parallel means when this is a thin film, the two surfaces of the film are parallel to each other, right? Okay. So, this is your incident light, partly reflected, partly transmitted. It will see this one, partly reflected, partly transmitted. It will keep on going like this, and you will have multiple rays on the reflected side and transmitted side. When you put them together, you will see, interference, because they originally are derived from the same original source. So it is actually a multiple beam interference. This is not a two beam interference. It is actually a multiple beam interference, because you have multiple rays interfering either on reflected side or on transmitted side, right? So because they all are traveling different distances to reach here, so you are going to get, basically they will all carry a phase difference and path difference between them. When you superpose them together using a telescope or something here, you will see interference fringes. In this case, typically in a plane parallel thin film, you're going to see fringes of equal inclination, because each fringe corresponds to one particular angle of incidence, and they are in general going to be circular. Why? Because if this is the normal, if this ray makes an angle I, this ray will also make an angle I. You can correspondingly visualize, okay? I can't show in 3 dimensions, but you should realize that a cone of rays having the angle I as incidence is going to, basically they will all correspond to same angle of incidence. And when you superpose them, ultimately, because the base of the cone is a circle, you're going to see circular fringes in general as fringes of equal inclination. They are going to result in, plane parallel thin films. Okay. And you also call them Hedinger fringes. Fringes of equal inclination are also called Hedinger fringes. Now, this is a typical representation. This is a plane parallel thin film. The ray coming like this, partly reflected, comes back, partly reflected here. So you are going to get a number of rays here and a number of rays here. Okay. So if you focus this, you will see fringes on reflected side. If you focus this, you're going to see fringes on transmitted side, right? This is the typical, you can do the mathematical part of it. You can add the paths, find out the path difference. Okay. And the expression for the path difference is 2 mu t cos r. Okay. So because they have taken a 2 here, otherwise it is 2 mu t cos theta. I mean, you must remember it by heart. I'm sure everybody remembers it by heart. 2 mu into the refractive, mu is a refractive index, d is the thickness, theta is the angle of refraction. Whenever this is equal to n lambda, you will see a dark fringe. Whenever this is equal to 2n plus 1 lambda by 2, you will see a bright fringe. Why the reversal? Because of that extra pi. Okay. Because, the first ray, if this is a denser medium, the first ray suffers reflection at an optically denser medium. So this will carry an extra pi. So because of that, the conditions of interference will change. N lambda will give you dark fringes, and 2n plus 1 lambda by 2 will give you bright fringes. Fine. So this is what is basically summarized here, right? So now the next we talk about fringes of equal thickness. Fringes of equal thickness basically correspond to, a typically wedge-shaped air film. Wedge-shaped air film means you have two surfaces. These two enclose a thin film between them, but this thin film is not of constant thickness. The thickness of the film is varying from point to point. Okay. So you say that this is the case of interference in wedge-shaped thin film or a film of varying thickness. Okay. So as you can see, the thickness of the film is 0 here. As you go, it increases. Each time, if you are talking about normal incidence, then the path difference is 2t, right? Again, the ray which is reflected from this will be reflected at an optically denser medium. So this will carry an extra pi. So the conditions will again be that whenever the part difference is n lambda, you will see bright fringe, okay, sorry, dark fringe, and whenever this is 2n plus 1 lambda by 2, you will see a bright fringe. Do the simple mathematics and you can get an expression for beta, the fringe width. It is lambda by 2 mu theta. So you have 4 parameters here, lambda, beta, mu, and theta. If you know 3 of them, you can find out the 4th. Okay, so these are called fringes of equal thickness because here t is 0. So you will see a dark fringe. When t becomes lambda by 2, you will see the first bright fringe. Okay, lambda, dark fringe, 3 lambda by 2, bright fringe, and so on. So one particular fringe is, for one particular fringe, the thickness of the film is constant. The thickness of the film, one particular fringe corresponds to one particular thickness of the film. That is why you call them fringes of equal thickness, and you also call them Fuso fringes. Fuso is the name of the scientist. Now, this is the experiment for Newton's rings. This is again a very important experiment. It is an experiment which is based on fringes of equal thickness. As you can see, this is a wedge-shaped film. Okay, what is the arrangement? You have a sodium lamp, then you kind of broaden the source. This is a beam splitter. The beams go like this. They're partly reflected from the upper surface of the film enclosed, partly reflected from the lower surface of the film enclosed. Interference occurs between these two when they go back and interfere. Okay, and you will have fringes of equal thickness. Okay, but there is one thing, because in this case you have a concentric circular thickness of the air film. This is the point of contact, and about this point of contact, the air film is symmetrically situated. So you might have same thickness here and same thickness here. So, and this is, like this is circular because this is part of a circle. So instead of seeing straight line fringes, you will see circular fringes, although they are very much fringes of equal thickness. They are not fringes of equal inclination. It is because of the geometry of the experiment, because the thickness is constant over a circle, you will see circular fringes, not straight line fringes. Okay. So again, because the rays which are reflected from here suffer a pi, so the conditions are kind of, reverse. This is the typical look of fringes. They are called Newton's rings because Newton was the first scientist to observe them. Okay, actually this is dark, and then you have alternately bright and dark fringes. One more typical characteristic you must have observed if you perform this experiment, that near the center they look far apart, but near the outer end they become close to each other. They appear to be crowded. Why? This is hidden in numbers in the derivation. This is the expression for the part difference. Okay, this is the same thing. Bright fringes, dark fringes, right? Right. Now, if you do this simple derivation, this is called Sagitta theorem. With the help of Sagitta theorem, you complete this circle. So this into this is equal to this into this. This is the mathematics theorem. Okay, use that theorem and you get an expression for the diameter of the ring. In terms of the radius of the, you get this here, d is not diameter, here d is shown as the thickness of the film. So the formula for the thickness of the film is half r square by 2r. Okay, so in the radii of the rings can be determined in terms of these parameters. Right. Now, what I was saying, why they appear to be crowded is the following. The reason is this. When you put the things together, the radius of the fringe turns out to be proportional to under root of n. Because it is proportional to under root of n, you just calculate it. Find out r2 minus r1, that will be proportional to under root 2 minus under root 1. Find out under root of 25 minus under root of 24, 25th fringe, 24th fringe. You will see that distance R25 minus R24 is much less than R2 minus R1. So this reason is actually mathematical. There is no physics here. Just because it is proportional to under root of n, you will see the fringes to be crowded at the outer end. There is absolutely no other reason for that. Okay, you can use this experiment to find out the wavelength of the source, plot dn square versus the order of the fringe, straight line, find out the slope, and use this formula to calculate lambda. Okay, you can also use this experiment to find out refractive index of a rare liquid. What do? You introduce that liquid in between the lens and the plate and perform the experiment, get Newton's rings, use this formula, and you can get the refractive index. If you don't know the wavelength, repeat the experiment with air film first and then the liquid film, and this is the formula for you. Shall I stop? Dr. Punita, shall I stop?
Yes,
You're on
ma'am.
mute.
Yes, ma'am. If you so please, then
Yeah.
then I
I
can
think I think I will stop because you are waiting. So I'll continue from this point in my next class.
There is only one question in the question answer box, ma'am. Can you have a look?
Just a minute. Where is the question? Yeah. I can't see the question. It is not showing me anything.
There is a question answer box.
No, I'm clicking it. अच्छा ये कह रहा है कि your screen sharing. I have to stop share, है ना? Okay. Now I think I can click. It is saying no open questions. Chat में है क्या?
No, ma'am. I'll just read it. Savita, don't just read out the question for her.
There is no. I don't know. This not okay. I can see the question now. What is P in the determination of the refractive index formula in the last slide? P, I think, is the order of the fringe, whether you're talking about 10th fringe or 20th fringe. So, I mean, if you want to find out mu, then you find out the radius of, say, 10th ring first, then you find out the radius of the 20th ring. P is 20 minus 10. Okay, because you will be working out the difference of the two radii. You are going to use that for determining mu, nothing else. It's just a number. So I think I will stop here and maybe I can.
Sorry, ma'am. Ma'am, there is one more question. Actually, I think you were disconnected. That's why that question has disappeared. The question is,
please read.
Why not use one prism instead of two prisms joined together in Fresnel biprism?
No. I said this. Maybe the person who has asked has missed it. You never make two prisms and join them base to base. That will cause huge losses. You always make one prism, but the structure is such that it appears as two prisms joined base to base. So you don't use two prisms. You actually make them from one prism only. Okay, you grind them to those particular angles. It is not two prisms. It appears like two prisms. It is not two prisms.
Ma'am, there is another question in chat box. Can you see?
Yeah. I can't see. Please read it out.
The circular fringes that we see experimentally are of unequal width, but a typical character of interference is fringes of equal size. Then why does so happen?
No. That depends on the experiment that you're performing. If you're talking about Young's experiment or, Lloyd's mirror or Fresnel's biprism, you will have interference fringes of equal width. But if you are talking about a particular experiment like Newton's fringe, this will also happen in Michelson's interferometer. If you are using that particular experiment where, this is bound to happen, where the radii or the diameter of the ring turns out to be proportional to under root of n. Only there the crowding or the unequal distance between the fringes will happen. Otherwise, normal interference experiment, I mean, it depends on the interference conditions. It depends on the geometry of the experiment. It depends upon how you have designed your experiment. For specific experiments, you are going to get fringes of equal width, but for specific experiments, you are not going to get fringes of equal width. So Newton's rings is such an experiment. Michelson's interferometer is another such experiment. There also you are not going to get fringes of equal width. You will see crowding of circular fringes at the outer end, and actually for exactly the same reason. It depends on the experiment that you have designed. That doesn't happen for every experiment.
I think question answers
So-
are, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, ma'am, for this second lecture on waves and optics. It will be definitely beneficial to all, whether you have completed waves and optics or even if you are in the master's level, because it is a very important part of physics and is connected in many ways to the other parts also. Thank you very much, ma'am. So we will continue next day again with this session of waves and optics, and now I will start with nuclear physics. Dr. Savita, would you please stop the recording now?